Power beyond belief. Luxury beyond imagination. Mummies beyond description. Riches beyond fabulous. Welcome to the afterlife, ancient Chinese style. Enter the secret, splendid, tragic world of China's megatombs. Man-made mountains that once proclaimed the might of emperors and brought dynasties to their knees. China, Shaanxi Province. A few kilometers outside the city of Xi'an. Just another day on another busy highway in the world's fastest growing economy. Until the highway suddenly becomes a runway. Over the next 45 minutes, a team of experts steers a small drone aircraft over Shaanxi's farmlands and brings it back to Earth, retrieving its precious payload. Images of an astonishing world. A world of mega marvels. Hundreds of earthen mounds rising above the farmlands near Xi'an. Some merely large, others gigantic. What's buried inside them is mostly unknown. But who's inside isn't any mystery. These are the tombs of emperors, generals, lords and ladies, some of the richest and most powerful people who ever lived on Earth. 2,000 years ago, these peaceful farmlands ran with blood as armies clashed and dynasties rose and fell. They rang with music and laughter as China's nobility reveled in all life's pleasures. And they echoed with the sounds of toil as thousands of workers built massive pyramid tombs, monuments of a splendid world even death couldn't end.
These tombs were symbols of power, they were symbols of wealth, they were symbols of political legitimacy. They said everything about how a person lived in their lifetime. They said it for eternity. To put it simply, we could say, I've got the biggest tomb, I'm the best.
It's a rare event when archaeologists open one of these mega tombs, giving experts like architectural historian Tonya Eckfeld a look inside. So many mysteries still lie beneath the earth. But one thing is clear. Centuries ago, building these tombs was a mega challenge. To satisfy their emperors, engineers had to move millions of tons of earth, dig huge holes dozens of meters deep, and cover them with man-made mountains. How did they do it? The year is 246 BC. China doesn't exist. Instead, 7 small kingdoms fight each other for supremacy. In one of them, called Qin, A new king has just inherited the throne. He's only 13 years old. But one of his first acts as king is to order the construction of his tomb. To us, 13 might seem a little young to be worrying about death. But as archaeologist Charles Hyam points out, 2,000 years ago, 13 was a lot older than it is today.
Who can tell how long he would live? Some people were dying in their 20s or 30s, and therefore it was vital for him to ensure his immortality immediately.
For the royal tomb builders, success or failure depended on getting one thing right: location. In ancient China, important tombs had to be built on higher ground, and a king's tomb had to be the highest of all. But building on high ground was no guarantee of success, unless workers could easily dig it dozens of meters deep. The tomb builders picked a site 89 kilometers from the royal capital, on the slopes of a mountain called Mount Li. What they probably didn't know was that the tomb they were about to build would be one of the greatest tombs ever built on Earth. Because the boy king of Qin didn't go to an early grave. He grew up to do something no Chinese ruler had ever done. He crushed his rivals in a series of brutal wars and unified their kingdoms into a single empire under his command, the Empire of Qin. In English, China. By 221 BC, he was the most powerful man in his world, and he knew it. He renamed himself Qin Shi Huangdi, the first emperor of China, and he wanted a tomb that would leave no doubt about who he was and what he had done.
What better way to project your limitless power than to have the biggest mausoleum, the biggest pyramid ever built?
For his tomb builders, the first emperor's triumph was one of history's biggest game changers. Now, they couldn't just build a tomb that was fit for a king. They had to build a monument to the most powerful man in China's history. Luckily, they were already working from a brilliant blueprint. A tomb that centuries later would astonish its discoverers. 1977, Chinese archaeologists excavate the tomb of an aristocrat named Zheng Houyi, who died some 200 years before the first emperor. It was a tomb unlike any ever found in China. Earlier Chinese tombs had been simple vertical shafts. But Zheng Houyi's tomb was an underground palace, divided into chambers with holes in their walls and the coffin, so that his soul could roam at will through his eternal mansion.
200 years before the first emperor's tomb, we have a whole new concept, and that concept is this: that you don't just have a tomb, you have a palace, an underground set of chambers, each one to its own purpose, within which the dead would live in perpetuity.
These great and powerful men would live on after death, and their tombs would need to satisfy all their requirements.
Zheng Houyi's afterlife required a complete orchestra. and almost 10 tons of exquisite bronze serving vessels.
The bronze serving vessels, the wine vessels, the food vessels in this particular tomb are, at least in my view, some of the most, if not the most, spectacular bronze castings ever to come from the ancient world.
But fine music and fine food weren't all that kept Zhang Huoyi eternally happy. Archaeologists found the skeletons of 8 young women in his tomb. Concubines, slain at his death to keep their master company for eternity. Some 2 centuries after the death of Zhang Huoyi, engineers began building the first emperor's tomb. China's greatest underground palace. But according to archaeologist Wang Sheyi, the tomb builders couldn't even tackle that challenge until they solved another problem. A problem that threatened disaster.
We are standing on the drainage side of Mount Li. There are 5 streams flowing down through Mount Li, and all of them were flowing directly towards the first emperor's tomb. Every year during flood season, the level of the water was high. The tomb's construction might be plagued by floods.
Before they could start building the first emperor's tomb, his engineers had to divert the streams that threatened to destroy it. Drivers on this highway may not know it, but they are passing the 2,000-year-old solution.
I'm standing on the dam, which is 3,000 meters long, between 20 and 75 meters wide at the top, and between 12 and 15 meters high. It was built with earth removed from man-made ditches that redirected streams around the tomb.
For the first emperor's tomb builders, constructing a dam that size was only the warm-up act. With water now diverted from the tomb site, they had to dig big until they had a burial chamber large enough for an emperor's underground palace. When the emperor died years later, they'd have to cover the pit with a man-made mountain. Fortunately for them, they were about to build China's biggest tomb with one of history's most remarkable building materials. Even today, it's easy to find, easy to work with, and very, very cheap. Dirt cheap. On New Zealand's North Island, engineering student John Cheer and his team are building a house. But this house isn't made of brick or wood or stone. It's made of dirt. That's right, dirt.
Just control it very carefully. If you ram it softly first, you'll get it down a little bit.
John and his crew are part of a worldwide movement of 21st century builders who think that turning the earth under our feet into roofs over our heads is a great way to go.
It might look like ordinary dirt, but it's actually a very strong material. These earth structures last hundreds of years, sometimes even thousands of years.
Structures like the oldest sections of the Great Wall of China, still standing today. Thanks to some simple but powerful building techniques that haven't changed in over 2,000 years.
Awesome.
Whether it's a house in modern New Zealand or the Great Wall of China, building successfully with dirt depends on 2 things. First, add a binding material to the earth so it won't crack and fall apart.
Try and be like the rain. Sprinkle it all over, but lightly.
Today, the New Zealand crew's using flax fibers that grow nearby. But the first Emperor's builders had binders of their own that were just as easy to find.
The Chinese use sticky rice to bind their soil. It's also quite common to use manure.
Second, keep water out. Water will find its way into any air pockets inside an earthen wall. Once inside, it will turn the earth to mud, or freeze and expand, and the wall will collapse. So, if you're building with earth, you need to make sure it doesn't have any air pockets. And there's only one way to do that. Ramming it down into a frame to squeeze out all the air until it's as dense as concrete.
Judging from what I can see, the boys have done a very good job, and I can tell because this wall is very smooth, and when you feel it, it's very solid, and that means we got the ramming right.
And these guys aren't the only ones who got it right. In Xi'an, archaeologists are excavating the tomb of an ancient Chinese general. Its rammed earth walls are nearly 2,000 years old and still going strong.
The secret of this rammed earth construction is to build it up in small layers and pound it very, very thoroughly until it becomes extremely hard. That way, it becomes very, very stable. This wall shows the rammed earth construction. What we see here are many, many layers, perhaps 25 or 30, just in this small part of wall that have been marked out by the archaeologists, each one showing a layer of rammed earth. It would have taken hundreds of men many months to complete the whole tomb using this method of rammed earth construction. To knock on it, it's almost as hard as concrete.
Hundreds of layers of rammed earth built this general's tomb, and it was tiny compared with the tomb of China's first emperor. A man-made mountain some 350 meters on each side, between 50 and 70 meters high, and made from more than 3.5 million tons of earth. And it was more than just a tomb. It was nearly 6,000 hectares, one of the largest mortuary complexes anywhere on Earth. The tomb's never been excavated, but ancient accounts give an unforgettable description of the burial chamber. Its roof shining with heavenly constellations. Its floor recreating the emperor's realm with flowing rivers and oceans made of mercury. And replicas of all his palaces waiting to welcome his soul. Surrounded by everything he would need to rule for eternity as he had on Earth. Everything. The ancient accounts don't even mention what his tomb builders tucked away in 3 obscure pits in one corner of the tomb. An army of clay, 8,000 strong, the now famous terracotta warriors. Nearby pits held other magnificent statues of jugglers, acrobats, officials, and chariots, and horses attended by their grooms. The emperor's world modeled in bronze and clay. And a break from a very dark tradition. Before the first emperor, Chinese rulers sacrificed real people to serve them in death. But the number of human lives needed to equip this tomb for the afterlife would have been too awful to contemplate.
By the time of the first emperor, it was clear that you couldn't literally slay an entire regiment of an army, but replicas were perfectly satisfactory.
But concubines were different. Ancient records claim that the first emperor took all his childless concubines with him to the grave. But are those ancient records true? In 2005, a team of archaeologists found evidence they might be. They discovered the outlines of a huge 80 by 50 meter chamber inside the mound, surrounded by a stone wall nearly 150 meters long and 125 meters wide. They also discovered high concentrations of mercury in the surrounding soil. A huge burial chamber and high concentrations of mercury hint that tales of underground rivers and seas of mercury and stories of sacrificed concubines might be true. But there's another incredible story about this tomb. A story that's created a mystery. A mystery that remains unsolved to this day. Ancient records say that when the first emperor's tomb was finished, it was 115 meters high, twice as tall as it is today. At that height, its base would have been 500 meters on each side, making the tomb 5 times bigger than it is today, and 4 times bigger than Egypt's Great Pyramid. If it was so much bigger, why is it so much smaller today? Many experts believe that 2,000 years of wind and rain have eroded the tomb's enormous dirt mound. But there's another theory. Some believe the tomb's too low because it was never finished. Why would the most powerful man in China spend years building himself an incredible tomb and then not finish it? In this pomegranate orchard near the tomb, archaeologist Zhang Zhongli may have found the answer.
There are huge numbers of bones here. This one is either a thigh or a shin. There is a scalp over here. You can even see teeth here. So the body lies this way.
The first emperor's tomb wasn't just built with tons of cheap dirt. It was also built with thousands of cheap human lives.
We cannot tell how many skeletons are here. They're all mixed together. I think there's one here and another over here. The bodies are not placed in any order. This is a group tomb.
Who were these people? Their modern portraits are nearby. When he unified all of China, the first emperor acquired the biggest labor force in Chinese history. A force he conscripted to build his mega tomb. Today, visitors to the tomb site see those workers depicted as heroes. But their bones tell a very different story.
Look at this skull. From the teeth, we know that this person was only around 30 years old. But he died because of intense work and difficult working conditions.
Even for strong young men in the prime of life, building the first emperor's tomb was a living hell. Tomb workers labored from dawn to dusk, worked to exhaustion, deprived of food and sleep. Thousands succumbed to miserable deaths.
After any worker died, his body was thrown in a burial ground rather than in a personal grave. The bones were piled up more than 10 centimeters high.
The first emperor's tomb is entirely impressive. It's wonderful, it's innovative, it's inspirational. The tomb is also shocking because of the human suffering it caused.
The tomb's horrific toll in human labor wasn't its only cost. No Chinese ruler had ever spent so much money on his tomb. In the end, the price was too high. The first emperor died in 210 BC. The next year, China's exhausted people rose in revolt. 3 years later, his successor was murdered, and his dynasty ended after only 15 years. In the chaos that followed the emperor's death, his tomb may never have been finished. And that might explain why it isn't as tall as it's supposed to be. The tomb built to proclaim an omnipotent dynasty helped destroy it in a single lifetime. But the first emperor's great achievement, a unified China, never fell apart. New rulers would inherit his empire and struggle with a seemingly impossible challenge: how to build great tombs without destroying their dynasties. 8 bloody years have passed since the death of China's first emperor. A peasant leader defeats rival armies and founds China's next imperial dynasty, the Han.
The manner of government of the Han was far less abrasive, far less dramatic, and far less of the harshness that is to be found with the totalitarian approach of the first emperor.
But the first emperor still haunts the new dynasty. His massive tomb dominates the landscape, demanding to be equaled by anyone claiming to succeed him.
The first Han emperor also wanted a tomb which would serve as a monument equally impressive to that of the first emperor. The dilemma for him was how to do this without also causing hardship to the people.
Generations of Han emperors would read that riddle, building a line of gigantic tombs just north of their imperial capital. And that location was no accident. 2,000 years ago, these tombs stood between the Han Empire and its most terrifying enemy, the Huns. Year after year, the murderous nomads swept down from the northern steppes, plundering China's wealth. Han emperors built their tombs where they could help defend the empire.
It's a sign of architectural and monumental strength in a physical sense, also in a spiritual sense. If the spirits of the emperors could live on, then they would be a protective force between those at the capital, those in the Han Empire, and those beyond.
But to offer more than symbolic protection, the imperial tombs would also have to be military outposts. At one tomb called Anling, archaeologist Jiao Nanfang has found evidence that they were. Across the road, a modern village still boasts rammed earth walls built during the Han dynasty, when this village was Anling's fortified tomb town.
West of where I'm standing is Anling's tomb town. We have discovered that Anling's town was 1,200 meters long from east to west, 800 meters wide from south to north.
In Han times, Anling's Toontown was home to 100,000 people who helped build and maintain the imperial tomb. And they helped defend the empire whenever the Hun showed up. But marauding nomads weren't the only threat. Han emperors had other dangerous enemies inside their own borders. Powerful nobles who commanded their own armies. Potential rivals to the imperial throne. Another reason for Toontowns. The emperor always chose a powerful aristocrat to oversee the building of his tomb. An honor no one could refuse, even though it meant leaving home to live in a Toontown. In return, the Toontown was excused from paying taxes. But the emperor got the best of the bargain by separating rivals from their power base at home.
By moving these local strongmen close to the capital, the emperor could control them. The local lords lost their power, and the emperor's power grew.
The size of imperial Han tombs hints at magnificent burials inside. But that's something we may never know, because no archaeologist has ever excavated a Han emperor's tomb.
These are great ancestors of the Chinese people. Is it right and proper to get into and to excavate and to find out more when they should, in fact, be left as they would have wished themselves, in peace, in perpetuity? Well, this is a very interesting dilemma.
But archaeologists have opened the tombs of royal Han princes. Inside, they've found an astonishing world, built for an afterlife beyond imagination. Some 850 kilometers from the imperial tombs at Xi'an lies the modern city of Suzhou. During the Han dynasty, this place was ruled by the emperor's relatives. Today, you can visit their tombs, where kings believed their luxurious lives on Earth would continue after death. But to properly enjoy the afterlife, a king needed more than just the perfect tomb. He also needed a magnificent burial suit, made of thousands of pieces of jade, believed to preserve the body forever. Ancient texts hint that during the Han dynasty, alchemists and embalmers tried to keep aristocratic corpses eternally fresh. And at least once, they may have succeeded. In 1971, workers digging a tunnel in the Chinese city of Changsha made one of the most incredible archaeological discoveries of all time. The body of a noblewoman named Xin Jue. Xin Jue had died more than 100 years before the birth of Jesus. But incredibly, her body was so well preserved that Chinese pathologists could autopsy it like a freshly dead corpse. No one can explain how Xin Jue became one of the best preserved mummies ever found. But some believe her tomb builders had engineered her amazing preservation. Dead bodies decay faster when they're exposed to air and water in the grave. But Xin Jue's embalmers buried her in a tomb 20 meters deep, wrapped her body tightly in 20 layers of silk, sealed it into 4 nested coffins, each of them sealed with lacquer, and surrounded her wooden burial chamber with 1.5 meters of charcoal and over 1 meter of dense white clay. All that would have kept air and water away from her corpse. Proof to some experts that Qin Shi Hui's tomb was purpose-built to preserve her body. But the Han also surrounded tombs with loose stones and gravel. Because air and water weren't the only tomb invaders. In ancient China, grave robbers were the ultimate threat to a happy afterlife. Some tomb builders tried false advertising to keep robbers away. This 2,000-year-old inscription on the Guishan tomb advises would-be thieves not to bother, since the tomb has nothing valuable inside. It didn't work. Guishan was robbed anyway. According to archaeologist Zhang Jianyin, loose stones and gravel were a much better way to foil tomb robbers, simply because the robbers couldn't dig through them.
When robbers tried to dig a hole, the sand and stones would collapse and keep falling down, so they couldn't keep digging. This is a burglar-proof method.
But that wasn't the only way the Han discouraged tomb robbers. This army of clay soldiers, found in a Han general's tomb, is striking evidence of a downsized afterlife. These troops were doll-size compared to the first emperor's life-size terracotta army. And their weapons were toys, unlike the real weapons the terracotta warriors held.
What we see here is that the ruling class have learnt a lot about how to be a wise ruler. There was not that degree of wastefulness that we saw in the Qin period.
Han Dynasty tombs cost less money than the first emperor's massive mausoleum. But a grim discovery reveals that Han tomb builders could be just as cruel as the first emperor. Excavators found these iron shackles still clamped to the bones of workers who died building a Han emperor's tomb. Archaeologist Chen Bo shows just how painful they were.
The two round ones are worn on the wrists and are very similar to handcuffs. The one with the long tail was designed to put on a slave's neck. The long tail pushed down against the spine. In this way, slaves were forced to bend down while working. They couldn't stand up straight, so it prevented slaves from escaping.
Through the centuries, there were uprisings at tomb construction sites. It was not unknown for the workers to revolt, to throw stones at officials, to cause damage and to run away.
In 220 AD, after 4 centuries of rule, the Han Dynasty finally collapsed, leaving future emperors to ponder the enduring riddle of building for grandeur while hanging on to power. One dynasty would search the past and find a brilliant solution that still gave emperors glory, while finally ending centuries of suffering. About 600 AD, China emerged from the centuries of political chaos that followed the downfall of the Han. For the next 300 years, the emperors of the Tang dynasty would lead their country to new heights of wealth and sophistication.
During the Tang dynasty, China was the most advanced country in the whole world. It had a thriving capital with more than 1 million people. It was multicultural. People came from all over the world. It was well connected to other parts of Asia and even to Europe via the Silk routes. It was prosperous, it was enlightened, it was advanced.
Enlightened as they were, Tang emperors were well aware of the age-old imperial predicament. Only great tombs guaranteed respect, but expensive tombs that drained the treasury and enslaved the people guaranteed rebellion.
As one Tang emperor said, the people are like water, they can support your ship or they can overturn it and sink it.
Preferring to sail instead of sink, Tang emperors searched for a solution to the problem of tomb building. They found it here, at Baling, the tomb of a Han emperor named Wendi. Appalled by tomb building's huge cost and the terrible suffering it caused, Wendi decreed that his tomb would be different. Baling isn't a huge pit covered with a man-made mound. Instead, Wendi ordered his engineers to tunnel the shaft into a mountain. It was easy, it was cheap, and it found grandeur in nature instead of building it on the backs of slaves.
A great emperor should have a very high and big mound on his tomb. But the problem disappears when it comes to a mountain tomb. The only thing to do is to dig a shaft. Digging a shaft only needs dozens of people, while constructing a mound would need at least tens of thousands of people.
Baling was a revolution in tomb design and an inspiration for the emperors of Tang.
Emperor Wen to the Tang emperors stood out as a wise and enlightened emperor who cared for his people and used common sense in the exercise of his rule.
This is Jiuzhong, a mountain 83 kilometers from modern Xi'an. It's also Jiaoling, the tomb of the Tang emperor Taizong, who died in 649 AD. Somewhere on this mountain is the shaft leading to Taizong's burial chamber. Today, no one knows where it is. Ancient records say that Taizong's engineers built a plank road up the sheer face of Jiuzhong Mountain so they could dig the emperor's tomb where it could never be found. We can't explore the lost tomb of Emperor Taizong, but we can enter the nearby tomb of his beloved daughter, Changle, who died in 643 AD at the age of 23. Princess Changle went to a Tang-style eternity, significantly downsized from the luxurious afterlives of dynasties past. No life-size armies of clay attended her, only small figurines. And no kitchens, banquet rooms and toilets awaited her. Only paintings of the earthly life she would still enjoy in death.
There were rules about how many figurines could be buried. 50 was 70. And how big figurines could be made. 40 centimeters or 50 centimeters. Different standards applied to different classes of people.
The Tang emperors were well aware that tombs would be robbed. Therefore, they saw that it would be wasteful to inter valuable objects in tombs. This meant that tombs would be less attractive to tomb robbers, remain undisturbed, and for the spirit, there could be an undisturbed afterlife.
Someday in the future, archaeologists may finally open the first emperor's tomb, excavate the vast burial mounds of the Han emperors, and discover the secret mountain chambers of the Tang. If they do, what will they find there? Imperial corpses astonishingly well preserved, treasures beyond imagination, or only what the tomb robbers left behind. That day may never come, but our few tantalizing glimpses of what lies inside these mega tombs of rammed earth and tunneled rock have placed them among the greatest monuments of the ancient world and among ancient China's greatest mysteries.